Hey guys, I'm Chastity, and you're listening to the Ancient Conspiracies Podcast, where we connect the origins of some of the most popular conspiracy theories to biblical history. Well, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to talk giants, and here's a forewarning. Today will be one of those episodes where you're going to want a notepad close by to take some notes. It's absolutely incredible information, but it's also incredibly heavy information, and it can easily become incredibly confusing. So I'm going to do my best to make it flow as smoothly as possible. So when you hear the term giants, what do you typically think of? Well, I tend to think of Greek mythology or the story of David and Goliath from the Bible. But the truth is that there are legends of giants throughout most civilizations on Earth. In Armenian legends, a race of giants actually helped construct the Tower of Babel. In Basque legends, the area between France and Spain, the giants were not only known for having superhuman strength and creating their megalithic structures, but they were also said to have secret ancient knowledge and wisdom that was unknown to the Christians. In Egypt, there are whisperings that the giants may have been the ones who built the Great Pyramids. And in Bulgaria, the giants were believed to have inhabited the earth before modern humans. They lived in the mountains, ate raw meat, and often fought against dragons. In Chile, there are tales of giants who play with ships like toys, and when laying down to sleep, they measured from the mountains to the sea. In some Chilean stories, the giants are black humanoids, and in other stories, they're depicted like black bulls. The native tribes of the American Southwest told stories of red-haired giants, curiously similar to the accounts of the red-haired giants from Ireland called the Tuatha De Danann. In India, early Sanskrit texts portray Buddha as a 9-foot-tall blue-skinned giant. And on Easter Island, local traditions have it that those enormous stone moai statues were actually erected by the giants. Now, the Bible also mentions giants, the most famous of which was Goliath, and he was a Philistine from the tribe of the Rephaim giants. The Bible also says that when the Israelites finally reached the Promised Land after their exodus from Egypt, there were tribes of giants living there, the Anakim and the Rephaim, the tribe of Goliath. Now, King Og of Bashan was said to be the last survivor of the Rephaim, and we're told in Deuteronomy that his bed was more than 13 feet long. The book of Amos refers to him as the Amorite, whose height was like the height of the cedars of Lebanon. Now, Flavian Josephus, a Jewish historian who was only born about 4 years after the crucifixion of Christ, he claims that the bones of the giants were on display even in his time, and that they were of a completely different bioengineering than that of humans. He describes the giants as a threat to all of the senses. They were hard to look at, they were hard to listen to, and they carried a strong, distinctive smell. But the greatest concentration of giant stories lies in the Mediterranean area. Greece, Rome, and Sumer all have giants predominantly featured throughout their mythologies. In the 7th century BC, the poet Hesiod wrote about the Cyclops, who were known as one-eyed giants who built incredible megalithic structures out of stone, what became known as Cyclopean masonry. And they were known for also making armor and weapons. The Isle of Malta contains some of the largest megalithic sites in all of Europe, which predate the pyramids of Egypt by more than 1,000 years. And they're among the earliest monumental architecture in the world. The Temple of Gigantea on Malta is literally translated from Maltese to mean the place of the giants or place made by giants. In Sardinia, Italy, there are even more megalithic structures called nuraghe, and these are cone-shaped towers with a flat top. Some even look like a beehive. Now, so far, archaeologists have covered 7,000 of these nuraghe in Sardinia, but it's suspected that there could be upwards of 20,000 of them. And they also uncovered roughly 800 tombs built for 9 to 12-foot giants. In 1974, on the western coast of Sardinia were found over 40 giant stone statues. They called them the Giants of Monte Prama, and the statues contained faces that look like C-3PO from Star Wars. And these giant stone statues called menhirs were not only erected in prehistoric times, but they're different than most other menhirs on Earth. They contain depictions of an unusual object falling from the sky to Earth that looks like a UFO. Now, archaeologists believe that the Sumerians, Nimrod's people, actually existed at the same time in history as these menhirs were being carved on Sardinia. And the Sumerians also wrote of beings who came from the sky, the Anunnaki. They were believed to be the creator gods of ancient Sumer and Babylon, the kingdoms of Nimrod. Now, a few hundred miles away from Sardinia is a town in Italy called Ferentino, and it's known for its megalithic wall constructions. According to tradition, they were built by the god Saturn and the giants. Now, the ancient Romans wrote that Saturn once reigned as an earthly king alongside Janus. And Janus is the god where we derive the month name January. Now, Saturn is often associated with the Greek god Kronos, and Janus, or Jupiter, is the Roman alias for Nimrod. In fact, in Roman mythology, Janus was the god of beginnings, gates, transitions, time, duality, and doorways, all of which we see with Nimrod. The reincarnation of the fallen angel religion after the flood was promoted by Nimrod. He also attempted to build a gateway to heaven, and he transitioned the people away from the God of his fathers. He served as a doorway which channeled these fallen angel spirits and brought them back after the flood. As we've talked about before, the Nephilim elevated themselves as the rulers of the pre-flood earth. They usurped all of the kingship of the pre-flood world and enforced a universal polytheistic religion of themselves. The Rephaim were the giants after the flood, and the Hebrew word Rephaim actually shares two different meanings. It refers to either a people of greater than average height and stature, giants, and or it refers to departed spirits in the Jewish afterlife, which is interesting because that's exactly what we're told happened to the giants after death. They became evil spirits that roamed the earth. So both translations point to giants who then became spirits. And the Rephaim also usurped the kingship of earth and again promote themselves as gods through the religion that Nimrod created. And these post-flood giants appear to go on and intermarry with the Canaanites. In the biblical table of nations, all of the genealogies carry the name of their patriarchs, like the Canaanites, the Scythites, the Israelites, etc. So it's likely that the daughters of the Canaanites married patriarchs from the line of the giants, which is why we see the descendants of Cain carry the names of the giants, Amorites, Hivites, Rephaites, etc. in Canaanite genealogy. And these came to be the nations which occupied the promised land with the Anakim, more giants, that were intent to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the speech that Jesus gave in Caesarea Philippi? I mentioned that prior to being called Caesarea Philippi, it was known as Panias, named after the Greek hybrid god Pan. And even further back in the Old Testament, it was known as Bashan, the kingdom of Og, and the historical stomping ground for the giants of the Bible. I mentioned that there's a cave there and also a spring within the cave. In fact, it's one of the largest springs feeding the Jordan River. Jordan translates to mean from Dan. Jor means from in Hebrew. Jordan means from Dan. And this alludes to the high probability that the location of the largest spring that feeds the Jordan River, right at the base of Mount Hermon, was the very location where the Danite tribe once lived, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, the Danites were given the emblem of a snake by Moses to adorn their flag because it's believed that they were destined to produce the seed of the serpent. In the book of Revelations, when the 144,000 are sealed in their heads, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes, the tribe of Dan is not mentioned, likely because his tribe represented the Antichrist. But here's where it gets interesting. It's believed that the Danites disappeared prior to 1050 BC. Now, we know that 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel are currently considered lost. Judah, the Jews, and Levi, the priestly line, are the two main tribes still in existence. But rabbis consider Dan to be the only tribe that was truly lost. And there's reason to believe that the Danites took ships and sailed to Peloponnesus, a large peninsula in southern Greece, where they eventually become known as the Spartans. If you remember, I mentioned a couple episodes ago that the Peloponnesian Mountains were believed to be the home of the Greek gods Hermes, who may actually be the biblical Cush, the father of Nimrod, and the Greek god Pan. In fact, it's suspected that Pan may actually be a corruption of the name Dan. And if that's the case, then this is yet another connection placing the Danites at Caesarea Philippi, formerly known as Panias. Now, Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey refer to the Spartans as Danans, and the Greek legend of the Battle of the Giants between the Titans and the Olympians was probably first told by the Danites about the fallen angels and their offspring, which eventually became the Greek religion. And if the Danites and the Giants can both be traced to have dwelt in the very same location on Earth, then there's a high probability that the giants either came from or were connected to the Danites. Do you remember those Celtic giants we introduced last week? The ones who were called the Tuatha De Danann? Well, Danann is spelled exactly like the Greek Danans, who were also the Spartans. Now, Danann in Gaelic translates to mean the people of the goddess Danu, or tribes from the goddess Danu, and Danu to the Celts was Mother Earth. Just like in the story of Enoch, the book of Genesis, and Greek mythology, Danu, or Earth, birthed the giants. And the etymology of the name Danu means to run or to flow, similar to the spring at Caesarea Philippi, where the tribe of Dan was located, which fed the Jordan River. But there's another well-known river associated with the name Dan or Danu, the Danube. And the Danube River is the second largest river of Europe. It originates in Germany and flows through 10 different countries. So the Tuatha De Danann, these Celtic giants, are said to have escaped Tartaria in Scythia. Now, Tartaria is where the Greeks derived the term Tartarus from, the prison of their giants, the Titans. And Tartaria is a conspiracy all on its own. A simple Google of the phrase Tartarian mud floods will have you so deep into a rabbit hole you'll never be able to see straight again. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. Now, maybe one day I'll do some more research on it and offer a podcast to explain it, but the gist of it is that Tartaria is believed to have once been a continent-sized kingdom pre-flood that had advanced technology and culture, similar to the legends of Atlantis, and it encompassed most of modern-day Russia, Ukraine, down into the Middle East, back across to Mongolia, and parts of Asia. Certain areas of which are considered to be some of the lowest points on planet Earth. So naturally, after the flood of Noah, these would have been some of the areas of the globe covered the deepest in mud. And this mud may have trapped the giants beneath the earth. And this may explain why the Greeks claimed that the Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus or Tartaria, and also why the Tuatha De Danann are claimed to have escaped from there. A possible conspiracy to explain how they resurfaced after the flood. Now, I haven't done enough research on it, but it appears as though Scythia may be the post-flood name for the pre-flood kingdom of Tartaria. The two kingdoms mostly overlap, but both were located on the northern side of the Black Sea. Now, Scythia encompassed parts of modern-day Bulgaria, Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, and sections of Russia and Asia, very similar to Tartaria. Now, I'm going to give a little history on Scythia because it's going to become relevant in just a moment. In 1853, British Assyriologist Sir Henry Creswick Rawlinson gave an address to the Royal Asiatic Society and claimed that the Scythians from the Black Sea regions were the early occupiers of Akkad in Mesopotamia. Remember, the Akkadian Empire was Nimrod's empire, of which were the cities of Akkad, Assyria, Uruk, where archaeology traces writing back to, and Sumer, where archaeology traces the earliest accounts of polytheism and many other things back to. So Sir Henry Creswick Rawlinson claimed that the Scythian writings dating 1,000 years before the earliest Sumerian writings are identical to those of Akkad, which basically verifies that all of the earliest everything, writings, beliefs, pantheons, mythologies, and people on Earth after the flood, can be traced back to this very location on the globe. Call it Akkad, call it Sumer, call it Babylon. It all came from Nimrod, who the Bible says was the first king to rule the earth after the flood. And his kingdom were the people who came from Noah before they were dispersed across the globe. And if there were giants actively living on the earth during the reign of Nimrod, who in many accounts claim him to be their father or their leader, then it explains how most civilization carried with them the stories of these giants after they were dispersed. Now, the Scythians from Akkad were known as warriors, very similar to the giants described in the Bible. They were also known to be mountain warriors, and they had very advanced weaponry. They were nomads who roamed the globe, and although the Scythians themselves weren't known for writing, most of the accounts of the Scythians in existence were written by Greeks, Assyrians, and Persians, and they were usually terrified of the Scythians, although often also impressed. In fact, the Greeks wrote about them being one-eyed men who lived at the base of a mountain range. Now, the Scythians were very much in love with their horses, and they took horse breeding and riding to a new level. They were very accomplished riders, and even their riding equipment was more advanced than any other. They were also known for covering themselves in tattoos, and their women were said to have possibly had blondish hair and blue eyes, while their males had red hair. They also mummified their dead, and they made a great effort to preserve the appearance of the dead, and it's likely that these customs were what influenced the cultures where they migrated, like Egypt, Greece, Assyria, and Persia. The very name Ur, where we get the name Uruk, the capital of Sumeria, came from the Scythian word Ur, meaning Lord, and the mother of the Scythians was known as Anu. She was the earth goddess. She was a half-woman, half-serpent being. Now, the Greeks wrote that Hercules was riding his horse through Scythia before it was ever inhabited by man, and he ends up camping there for the night. When he woke up in the morning, his horses were missing, and as he's searching for them, he comes across a cave with a hybrid woman inside, and she was said to have had a tail of a snake, but the upper body of a woman, and she claimed to have found his horses, and in order to get them back, he would have to sleep with her. They ended up having 3 sons, and Hercules ends up testing his sons for the reign of the kingdom. Scythes was the only to pass the test, and this is why the area became known as Scythia. It was named after the descendant of a demigod and the earth goddess. So like every giant mythology we come across, the giants came from heaven and earth. But here's where we can connect the Scythians back to the Celtic giants, the Tuatha De Danann. As we said earlier, Danann in Gaelic translates to people of the goddess Danu, or tribes from the goddess Danu, who was their mother goddess. But if you break down the word Danu to Danu, D''Anu, it translates of Anu, the exact name for the serpent hybrid goddess of the Scythians, tying the Tuatha De Danann of Ireland to Scythia. And if that wasn't enough, the Scythian warlords were also known as the Sidhe, exactly like the Celtic giants were known after their death. And if you remember, the Sidhe were spiritual or mythical beings known as fairies, elves, and leprechauns. But in other areas of the globe, like Romania, the Sidhe were also known as vampires. And vampires were compared to serpents, likely because of their connection to Satan and the devil. In the Romanian language today, Dracul means the devil, and this is where the house of Dracul obtained its name. It means the house of the dragon, or house of Satan, and therefore Dracula translates son of Satan, or son of the dragon. And Dracula was actually a real person who was born in Transylvania, in the mountainous regions of Romania. His real name was Vlad the Impaler, and he was pure evil. As his name implies, he was known for impaling his enemies, or anyone who defied him. And he impaled them vertically, going through the orifices in their nether regions, so that the exit wound would be towards their throat, shoulders, or mouth. And he was known for using blunt objects to avoid damaging organs in order to prolong the life of his victim. And then he would display them and watch them slowly die over the course of hours or even days. Now, the current King Charles of England is on record as saying that his genetics connect to Vlad the Impaler, who was also described as having red hair and hazel eyes, just like the Scythian giants were said to have had. And Vlad's bloodline, not surprisingly, traces directly back to Scythia, verifying not only in genetics, but through the translation of his name, that he was a direct descendant of these evil entities. Now, the nomadic Scythians are believed to have migrated across the Middle East, and then they marched north up the Danube River into Russia, over to Sweden, Norway, and England, and end up in Ireland, which is how they come to be the Tuatha De Danann. Now, there are differing descriptions of these giants, and some are said to have had blonde hair and blue eyes, coincidentally exactly what Hitler was trying to replicate, and others had red hair and hazel eyes. And it's believed that the red-haired giants eventually migrated to North America, because their remains have been discovered throughout North America by archaeologists, and the DNA of these skeletons found in North America trace back to Scythia. Now, the giants became fewer and fewer as mankind moved across the globe and basically wiped them out. But we continue to see the giants intermarry in order to keep their bloodlines going. And these bloodlines are the dynasties mentioned in the book of Daniel. Now, in order to keep their bloodlines alive, they had to continually dilute with other bloodlines to prevent diseases that are associated with interbreeding. The more that these bloodlines were diluted, the less they began to look like the original giants. For example, the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten has long been considered alien-looking. He was considered of noble blood, yet he was believed to have a serpentine look, even 1,000 years after the flood. Now, he was depicted with a slanted chin, high cheekbones, large slanted eyes, and an elongated skull, all characteristics of the ancient serpent gods. Now, over time, as the giants took on a more human-type appearance, it became important that they trace the pedigree of their genealogies back to prehistory. And the purer the bloodline, the higher they were elevated in society. Remember, as I said before, they elevated themselves as the gods before the flood and also afterward. But as time went on, the gods of old became more mythological. So rather than continuing to call themselves almighty gods or sky gods, they basically just elevated themselves as gods among men. They became the kings of every major dynasty on earth. And that's where we're going to pick up next week. As much as I absolutely hate to end here, I've run out of time, and I'm sure your brain is on fire anyway. So we're going to continue this discussion next week, but I want to leave you with an interesting article that I found while doing research for today's episode. Now, I'll link the article in the description of today's podcast, but it was posted just last year in April of 2021. And here's a quote from the opening paragraph. Quote, "Just 2 decades ago, archaeologists in Siberia made the discovery of a lifetime. Buried in the Republic of Tuva were the remains of 3,000-year-old Scythian warriors with their horses. Not content to let them rest, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has announced plans to clone them," unquote. And if you weren't aware, Sergei Shoigu not only runs the Russian Geographical Society, but he's one of the strongest allies of President Vladimir Putin, and he's currently serving as Russia's Minister of Defense. But he's also from the Republic of Tuva, where these warrior remains were found. Now, the article goes on to say that the burial is among the earlier Scythian remains, and it quotes Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC, who claimed that the Scythians made cloaks from their victims' scalps after victory. The savage warriors are believed to have used their enemies' skulls as drinking cups, and legends say they drank the blood of their vanquished foes, likely where we get the legends of vampires. So I just found it intriguing that today I introduced these beings to you from the distant ancient past, and yet as recent as 1 year ago, Russia, the literal land of Gog and Magog as listed in the Bible, is considering resurrecting an entire army of these beings and their horses, which were buried alongside them. Now, if that doesn't sound like something straight out of Bible prophecy, I don't know what does. Well, if you've enjoyed today's content, please hit the subscribe button, rate today's episode. I'd love to hear your feedback, and share this podcast with a friend. We'll see you next week.